So, as you can see, the movie is great, and from the movie, Spike Lee, John Cusack. Please welcome him.
Hello.
Hello.
How you doing?
Right. All right, so this movie, you guys filmed it this year, but it's been around, Spike, the script in some form for a long time, right? For 6 years or so. So could you tell us how this movie started, what the genesis of it is?
Well, Kevin Wilmot wrote the original script. It was called, at the time, Got to Give It Up. It was an adaptation of the Aristophanes' play Lysistrata, and we were unsuccessful to getting it done. And a year ago, I called him, let's try it again. I said, let's co-write it. Let's move it. Let's take place in Chicago, South Side. Let's call it Chiraq. And went to Sundance last January with my agent, Bart Walker, and we had a list of people to pitch it to. And everybody said no, except Amazon. And here we are. The film opens Friday.
Yeah, so it's been a pretty quick trip, and the name Chiraq, for a lot of people are just hearing about the movie now and recently. Could you give us a little background on that name and why you picked the location?
Well, that was around long before you made the title of the movie. That was a name that people in the South Side and rappers had been using for a while, and I think there were a bunch of videos and songs, and I think Vice did a series on that from Chicago. So that's been around for a while.
Yeah, and you're a Chicago guy too, John, right?
Yeah, I'd heard the name and the title and seen some of the videos and reports. And everybody, the guy that I play is named Father Corrigan, but it's very loosely based on a man named Father Michael Flager, who runs the parish of St. Sabina Church where we shot, and who was a very close advisor and close friend of Spike's, and became a close friend of mine as well. And he, like many others in churches and synagogues and mosques across the country, are basically doing everything they can to bring some semblance of peace and sanity to these urban centers that have become war zones. So even today, as of this count, I don't know how many people were killed in San Bernardino. 14 people were killed in San Bernardino today. Then there was the Planned Parenthood shooting just the other day. And then in Chicago, more than 2,300 people have been shot this year, and it's November. So there are people in St. Sabina, Father Flager, and many others all around the country who are basically desperately crying out for attention. And they welcome Spike and his track record and his tradition of making very fearless films. They welcomed him with open arms to tell this story. So. Yeah, but the name Chiraq was not invented by Spike Lee or Kevin Wilmot.
Yeah, and you guys shot on the South Side of Chicago too, right? You were saying a lot of people came
Yes.
out for open auditions. So what was it like doing a movie like this, very serious film, on location?
It was fine. We had no problems. People wanted to be there. People were excited. As John mentioned earlier, we had an open call at St. Sabina Church for extras, background. 5,000 people showed up, and many of the people made it in front of the screen from that audition. So it was a moving experience, but it was a movie. Real life was happening while we were filming. We started June 1st. We finished July 9th. During that time, 331 people got wounded and shot, 65 got murdered, and it escalated. It has escalated since then.
And even one of the things that, Spike has made a satire, and those often get misunderstood. It's not a comedy, it's not a tragedy, it's a satire. But so it has a lot of wild shifts and swings in tone. But one of the things that I think was so brilliant about the film and the experience was the line between the community and the film was totally porous. So when I was doing my sermon at St. Sabina Church, I'm in St. Sabina Church. Now, they're used to seeing caskets in the front of St. Sabina Church. This is happening every day. So even Father Flager's peacekeepers, Brandon and Kurt, I don't know if it's okay to say it, but one of them lost a brother right in pre-production.
No,
So-
my first day official pre-production, I attended the funeral. Brandon, who's one of the peacekeepers, these are former gang members who now work under Father Flake to keep the peace. His brother was shot down. So first day of pre-production, I was attending the funeral.
And then when we're doing scenes with Jennifer Hudson, who had her own tragedy in Chicago, in her family, the people who are seemingly to be extras, they're not extras. Those are the mothers of Purpose Over Pain who have lost their children, and the pictures that they're holding up are their actual children. So it wasn't like we're going on a soundstage and saying, oh, let's see if we can recreate the South Side of Chicago. We were immersed into the neighborhood with the people. So it made it sobered you up pretty quick. Like if you forgot what you were doing and thought you were making a movie, people around you were saying, no, this is how we live every day. And so we were reminded of that. And when I met Spike the first time, he called me up, which I think I've heard is how he calls up his friends to do a movie. He just calls up and says, Cusack. I said, yep. He goes, it's Spike. I got something for you. Chiraq. And I said, okay. And he said, when can we meet? And I said, I'll meet you anytime, Spike. Right? And then he told me what he was up to. And
like to piggyback what John said, everybody in front of the camera and behind the camera, we told them from the get-go that we want to save lives with this film. So that was the goal. We think we're going to do that. This film comes from a righteous place, a spiritual place, and we put value on human lives. And we're also trying to really get to these young brothers who are okay if they die before the year. Before they're 18 years old.
yeah, and when as I said, he said, I'm doing Chiraq. He goes, look, nobody's going to get paid. The only reason to do this movie is to save lives. And I don't think that's from a messianic point of view, but if Spike or other artists didn't believe that art had the possibility to actually be a voice for change, then we wouldn't do it all, or maybe we would. We try to get rich doing it, but we also have a part of us that know that art is supposed to affect change.
Well, and when we spoke a couple days ago, Spike, you mentioned Nick Cannon, who's great in this movie. It's he plays a gang leader and a rapper, and he's phenomenal. And you mentioned that he got some undue criticism for you can talk about it, but you made some real comments about what people saying about Nick Cannon, and maybe he wasn't from Chicago.
Well, there was some blowback about the casting of Nick Cannon, specifically coming from Chicago, Chicago rappers. The fact that he wasn't from Chicago, he's soft, he hasn't killed nobody, he ain't got bodies on him, he's not in the corner slinging. And this is the thing that really got me. He's not a savage. That's the new term, the new aspirational goal. It's not funny to be savage, and it's not all these young brothers, some. And so for me, I have to have sympathy for them, but their whole world is so shook. And Nick had this very great comment. He told me, hurt people hurt. And these brothers are crying out for help, for guidance. And it's a very serious situation.
The other aspect of that, too, is I think there's a little bit of a reverse kind of standard or double standard, because when I made the movie High Fidelity, and I love my city, I love Chicago, I shot in Chicago, I hired an English director, it was an English book, and no one asked me whether Jack Black was from Chicago. It doesn't really matter. So I think part of the thing of attacking the movie was because there are some people in Chicago who think this is going to hurt tourism, or this isn't good for the image of
That's what the mayor
art.
told me.
That's what we all got told on one way or the other. And I thought, well, fuck that. Money is not the only thing you're supposed to worship in this world. And I don't think the tour buses are going down to 78th and Halstead anyway.
The tour bus
So
is
I
not
just-
going to Wawa Hundreds,
But
not going to E-Dub, not going to Terror Town.
it's a very cynical thing to say that. So I think a lot of the attacks at the movie were to discredit it from a lot of different angles because it didn't fit into a profile of a certain kind of person and people who don't want to look at what's actually going on. But, you know, I grew up in Chicago and went down to Comiskey Park and University of Chicago, and it's never been this violent. So it's real. It's real.
I got a call from the director of tourism from Chicago, and the call's about, are we on the same page, Spike? This is true. The mayor, who's having his own problems right now, this moment in time and space, we met once before we started shooting in his office. A lot of people were in the room, Father Flager, several aldermen, and he said to me, Spike, I'm not trying to stop you from making a film, but I have problems with the title. It's going to hurt tourism and economic development. Will you change the title? I said no. I also told him that, like a lot of people who predicted riots, when Do the Right Thing came, a whole lot of other bullshit, you too are going to be on the wrong side of history when this film comes out. When we started, if tourism, there is no tourism in the south side of Chicago. Chicago, I mean, you know, you break it down better than I can, but while we were shooting, while we were filming the film, the NFL, Roger Goodell,
Yep.
the NBA draft was in Chicago. A quarter million people in Grant Park. The last 5 concerts ever of the Grateful Dead is Soldier Field. How many?
Yep.
What, 100,000?
Yeah. No, I think it's 60. I don't
Yeah,
think it's
but
one
if
of
you
those.
got people on the ground,
Yeah, a lot of people.
then you had Lollapalooza. So if this is why we were filming, you can, when those 3 events, you could not get a hotel room, a reservation, a restaurant. You couldn't get in the bar.
And not just that. I remember I went down there one summer and I saw what looked like the NFL draft, and they had the pharmaceutical companies were holding a huge convention, and they gave them the entire lakefront, huge tents, security, all that stuff. So it was an incredibly cynical thing to say, you know. And I didn't remember them worrying about tourism when they were blowing up robots with transformers and blowing up, you know. So I said, I think that the great city of Chicago can survive a film of conscience just like it
That was a
did
great quote.
Transformer. And I think people got mad at me for that one. But, you know, I just thought it was very weird and cynical that with 2,200 people shot that we should be worrying about money.
Or the title of film. And so a lot of these things,
I mean, it's not the title of the film isn't scandalous. What's scandalous is that 2,300 people have been shot. So,
and these things were distractions to get people away from what the film's about. And you're a football fan. Sorry about the Chicago Bears, but anyway.
they just beat the Packers.
They did. But Aaron's coming back. But what I'm going to say real quickly, if you know football, why don't you describe what a misdirection play is?
Well, when I first met Spike, he was a very bitter guy because
I knew it was kind of coming.
I went to the University of Chicago, and I saw Do the Right Thing, and I looked at this film and I said, my God, here's a great filmmaker. This is a powerful, powerful voice in film. And I had seen She's Gotta Have It, and so I became a fan and always wanted to work with him. But I had to, you know, be very gracious to him as Michael Jordan beat the shit out of the Knicks every year. And now on this press tour, you're trying to get back at me and mess with Chicago. But, you know, it's done. But it's a misdirection, right? It's a misdirection. It's like a no-look pass.
Right. And so all these things, the title, Nick Cannon, motherfucking Spike Lee's not from the South Side.
By the way, we
He's from
hired
New
more
York.
Chicago actors, and it was a job creation machine for as long as we filmed. So a couple actors came in from out of town. That happens on most movies.
Well, as you mentioned, the Chicago mayor, Rahm Emanuel, didn't like the title, but he's got, as you said, he's got bigger concerns right now. And it's unfortunate that the movie comes out at the same time as some...
No, it's good. I think there's so much happening. I mean, if you look at this film, I mean, it's like we grab shit out of the headlines. So,
And actually, Spike was as we were shooting, he would. I think it was, remember the
Okay.
Dylan Roof.
Yes.
So he wrote a scene and we shot it because even as we were filming, in the 8-week period we were filming, there were more gun massacres. So I think he wanted it out as soon as possible because I believe, I'm speaking for Spike Lee and he's sitting right here, but I think he thinks the film is a delivery system for some urgently needed serious politics. And so he wants that change as fast as possible, and so does everybody else.
We finished shooting July 9th. So for a film to finish shooting July 9th and to be in the theaters December 4th, that's a very accelerated post-production schedule, but there's urgency. That's why you see the film, you see that thing, this is an emergency. This is an emergency, and here's the thing. When I do press for a film, the one question I say, so Spike, what do you want people to come out of the theater? Usually they say, I'm not asking that motherfucking question, it's stupid. But this film is different because I want us to really, really work hard at thinking about what we can do about gun violence in the United States of America. How many San Bernardinos, Sandy Hooks, Charleston, South Carolina do we have to have? Today, 14 people shot. The Planned Parenthood, we could keep going, and 88 Americans die every day to gun violence, total 32,000. How can we call ourselves a beacon of democracy and all this other stuff, waving a flag? Other nations look like we're motherfucking crazy. 88 Americans die every day to gun violence, and it doesn't have to be that way. And we're also not talking about taking away people's, American citizens' Second Amendment rights. They're simple things. We get tough on background checks, like Father Flager has been talking about for years. We could title guns like cars. These things could knock that number down from 88 a day.
And
I mean, the solutions are there, and the org that was supported you last night, your march, everytown.org. You don't have to agree with everything they say, but these gun reform laws are pretty universally talked about and have been brought up for years. But unless you actually talk about the NRA and you talk about the money that's made off
The
of
gun
wars
manufacturers.
and the weapons manufacturers, I mean, it doesn't just happen. War Inc. doesn't just happen overseas. It happens here too.
absolutely.
So we can wear orange and say the right things and talk about human rights and be morally righteous, but unless you want to fuck with the money, nothing's going to happen. And I think
So about the Black Friday, talk about that.
which one?
How they shut down Magnificent Mile.
Oh yeah,
They're fucking with the money.
yeah. So I mean, even in Chicago, everybody was very worried, I think, and the White House was calling because they thought with the release of the video that there was going to be riots and violence.
Black
And-
people in riots.
Yeah, but it's not just. It was young people, black people. Everybody is disgusted by this, the normalization of this kind of violence that we see every day. So they had a very peaceful march, and they walked right down Michigan Avenue and on the Black Friday, and it was very purposely done, which the message was: we're going to interrupt commerce. We're not going to break any buildings. We're not going to do anything, but and that, I think, is, if we did that, or if people marched and did that enough, almost anything could happen because people don't, billionaires don't like losing money.
And what's fitting, yesterday we had the New York premiere of Chiraq. It was also the 60th anniversary of Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat, which led to the Montgomery boycott, and it went on for over a year. But finally, the bus company had to give up because of economics. So there are many, many different times we've seen in this country where people aren't going to do anything just for what's good, what's just, what's correct. Change is only going to come a lot of times when it affects the bottom line. And we saw that in Montgomery 60 years ago. We saw it Black Friday. We saw it at the University of Missouri, where black football players said, we're tired of how students of color are treated the racist treatment of us on this campus and said, we're going on strike. Their next game was against BYU, and Arrowhead Stadium was where the Kansas City Chiefs plays. That's an NFL stadium. The game was sold out. They're going to lose $1 million plus many more the rest of the season. There was going to be no games. And the board of trustees got together, and they told the president, motherfucker, you got to go. Those, for football, I mean, and I really think, I could tie that, for me, I think that started with Black Lives Matter, because Missouri, I mean, they're not really a powerhouse, so they recruit from in-state. St. Louis, Ferguson, so I think that stuff went from Black Lives Matter, University of Missouri, the president had to resign, the chancellor, and that has sparked activism all across colleges and universities just from what happened at University of Missouri. Again, it came down to money. They were going to lose $1 million against the next game, big BYU. Board of directors, the board trustees said, out of here.
You know,
But that, it also gets to a larger question, which is the ability to strike and affect capital that way and to organize is, that's been under siege in America for a long time. So it might not be the right forum to talk about those politics, but I do think if you're going to talk about this, it's not about just wearing an orange vest. And it's not about just being, pro-life and anti-assault rifles. You have to actually talk about the money and follow the money.
well, unions, labor unions were some of the biggest leaders of the organized, civil rights movement.
And what gets whitewashed a lot, too, is even when Martin Luther King was shot, one of the reasons that I think he was shot, too, was not that he was preaching nonviolence and love and brotherhood among all the races and a truly Christian gospel, but he was also talking about imperialism, wars, and he was striking with the sanitation workers. And they said, if these motherfuckers strike, you're done. So it's
True.
this is just history. So I think good intentions only bring you so far, and I don't think you're going to do it on it's not going to come from the top down. But I think if people demand it, maybe we can do something. But I don't know what else can you say when 2,200 people get killed and we're worried about tourism.
Or
Or 2,200 people got shot, so only 500 people have been murdered in Chicago.
That's the reason why me and His Honor had different opinions, because for me, a human life is worth more than the dollar amount. And this goes back to do the right thing. And I know many were born after that, but I'll let you know this. Do the right thing was like a litmus test if you read the reviews, and you could tell politically where people were. If you read the reviews of Do the Right Thing, where they were lamenting the loss of white-owned property, Sal's famous pizza burned to the ground, and not one mention Ray Raheem, that automatically tells you they put where their values are, white-owned properties, over supposed young black thug. So this is where we get to with these gun manufacturers.
But
they value, we get the politicians who are, like you said in the film, who are in the cahoots with the NRA and the gun manufacturers. They're putting profit over human lives.
yeah, that's true.
And John, you give when you guys say, what else do you say when 2,200 people get shot? You give a real barn burner of a sermon.
Which Father Flager has said I've heard it said in person.
Has
You
anybody
haven't
seen the
it.
film yet?
I think we need to show a clip of this sermon. 'cause
His
it's incredible.
scene. Come on, give it up.
They haven't seen it. But the real guy, you should see, Father Flager. Look him up on YouTube.
Yeah, I think let's watch the clip and then talk about you talking with him, because it's an incredible scene and he's an incredible guy, and so we should recognize that. So,
Father Michael Flavor, living saint,
So let's,
Saint Sabina Church.
It is a great speech. It's longer than that. When you see the movie on Friday, it comes out Friday, you'll see it. And I wanted to ask you about Talk with Father Michael Flager, who has been in the community a really long time. He's one of the centerpieces of the anti-gun movement there. So what did you...
Well, what's great about Mike Flager is he understands that that gun violence and this sort of violence, it may... If 2,200 people were shot on the Magnificent Mile, the Army would surround Chicago, and we would invade Chicago to take it back. So the fact that the people who are getting shot are in the primarily poorer areas, blacker areas, the western suburbs, this discussion may begin with the race element, but ultimately it comes down to class and economics. And Malcolm X said that, right? So many times. So he doesn't blame the police. He doesn't blame white people. He blames anybody who's doing the killing and anyone who's profiting on the killing and anyone who's staying silent about it. So across the spectrum, he is asking for accountability across all spectrums of society. So these divisions we have, I think, about it are non-existent. So I think he comes from a Jesuit Catholic liberation theology, social justice movement. He was as a young teenager, he saw Malcolm X walking down Martin Luther King walking down the street, and people were hitting him with rocks, and he said he was going to be a priest and devote his life to nonviolence. And he's not, it's not about the cult of Mike Flager or Spike Lee or anyone else. There are a lot of people doing this kind of work all over the place. But I think he, like the Berrigan brothers or the current Pope, he has a real strong sense of social justice that's been lacking from the church. And he believes the church should be a dangerous church. He believes it should be out on the street, and he believes it should be doing everything it can. And he's a radical cat. I mean, he puts bounties on people's heads from church. I mean, he puts a $5,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of any killer. He does some incredible things. And he really doesn't care what you think of him, because he's the one who is consoling the families and doing the funerals and the christenings, and he's living in that community. And we should make more stories about more Michael Flagers all across
the character
all across the states
that John played originally became more Michael Flager when we were shooting, but in pre-production, I was at Kevin Wilmot and I, the co-director, we were also thinking about Carl Malden's role in On the Waterfront. So
Carl Malden had more screen time, but I did good.
You never seen like that though, like that.
He did though.
What?
The scene
in the dock.
Yeah, in the dock.
Nah, this is better.
Oh,
and longer.
Can't argue with the director.
That scene's not 16 minutes though.
That's true. But that is a great character. But I also thought of the Berrigan brothers, who I grew up with too.
And also, it was really a homage to a dear friend of mine, the late great Bud Schulberg, who wrote On the Waterfront, won an Oscar for it too.
Yeah, and I know you shot it in the church with a lot of parishioners there, and so...
It was the congregation of St. Sabina. That's what I'm saying. Spike made it so the actors who didn't come from the community were just in the community. We were shooting all over the South Side.
And we've talked a lot about, political money and how to get gun violence, how to end that. And in this movie, in Chiraq, the point is the women of the South Side of Chicago decide that we're going to not have sex until the gangs put down their guns, put down their weapons. So I think we're going to watch a clip that clarifies that a little bit, and we will take some audience questions. But I want to make sure people see, what the film is. It's a satire, so let's see what that looks like here.
We forgot to say it's in verse.
Yeah, it's very, very impressively written. It's just that alone is such an accomplishment. But that whole movie in verse, or most of it, anyways. So yeah, it's really great. So and Teyona Paris is great too. I bet this is like a real breakout for her.
I saw her first time I saw her was in Dear White People.
Yeah, that's another great movie that came out last year. So I think we're going to start taking some audience questions.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chantal Haley. I'm currently a PhD student studying sociology at NYU.
NYU?
NYU,
All
down
right.
the street.
The Violets.
I went there for 6 months.
Really? Actually, and before I went to NYU, I actually did a lot of studies looking at the South Side Chicago, and particularly the experiences of kids.
The what?
On the South. I did a lot of work doing research on the South Side of Chicago, specifically kids and their experiences with violence. And so one of the things I'm really wondering is, does the film speak to that, both the experiences of the people who are surrounded by this violence, and also the structural components that have created Chicago and created many ghetto communities that have pervasive violence.
We deal with it, and the scene we were just talking about with John, which is a 60-minute eulogy / sermon. A lot of that stuff you just mentioned, he deals with it.
Also, I can just add to that too. One of the things that's was so frightening to me was when you would talk to people in that community, and it's, I live downtown. It's in a nicer, richer part of town, and it only take me 20 minutes to get to the south side if there's no traffic, and in there on my Vespa.
He was coming to the set sometimes on a Vespa without a helmet.
He tried to tell me I couldn't ride, and I said, "Look, Spike, I love you, but I hate traffic more, and I'm a grown man. I know I should."
Thank you. There's not a law there.
There isn't, but what they were telling me, what Father Flager and the community was telling me is, it was when they're going to high school in the South Side and the surrounding western suburbs, they leave seats open for the people who've been killed, and they have memorials already ready, and they say to people who are in grade school, they say, "Well, what do you want to be when you grow up?" And they say, "Well, I want to be alive." And this is not like poetic, hyperbolic shit. This is actually happening right now. So I think your point is that even people who aren't physically maimed or wounded are living with PTSD. They're living in an unnatural state that no child should ever have to. And you could even make an argument deeper than that, which is, forget all the Americans that have been killed in these wars. What about the places that we bombed? So violence is just normal. We kill and we plunder, we do what we want, and it's reaching our communities, and it's reaching the privileged areas of the communities too with the gun violence. So that's me not speaking for the film, but I think that's a very real thing. People are just living in a state of fear and in a state of PTSD.
It was to piggyback on what, I've never heard, you're leaving, say, "I'll see you later." It's not see you later. Be safe. Be safe. Be safe, be safe, be safe. Mothers will tell me, they say, "Spike, every time my child leaves the house, I pray to God my son or daughter returns to our homes," because it's a war zone, and no one's really done it. Another pick up on what you said, this post-traumatic stress. When you're children, elementary school, one day your classmates there, you come back the weekend, come back Monday, empty chair. So they're not really getting counseling on how to deal with loss like that. So people, and even the younger cats, like we have a scene in a film where Nick Cannon's character is pouring lean, the cough syrup, you mix it with the Sprite, and you throw some watermelon or grape Jolly Ranchers, and it's self-medication. It's self-medication. The guy is drinking lean, he's smoking, they're on pills. It's sad.
So you say the goal of this movie is to save lives, which is very commendable. And I work in behavioral neuroscience, and when you see a film like this, it's very topical. There's three main reactions, right? There's a standstill, nothing happens, a backlash, it moves in the opposite direction, or a revolution. And what is it about the way that you crafted this film that you think will spark a revolution and not either of the other two?
Well, number one, I believe in my craft. I believe my storytelling. I believe the great actors that I cast, and we have a righteous cause.
Well, and also you have to think about the revolution. If you know, that word has been bought and branded and co-opted by a lot of deep money. So that's more. Isn't that something that people would do with Nike and stuff? The revolution. You know, as I said, the revolution is only going to, anything that's going to, real change is going to have to be from the bottom up. It's not going to be you listening to me because I'm a movie star or give a fuck what I think. It's people are going to be so disgusted that they actually take action to affect the flow of big money. That's it. So if this is part of that conversation, that's good enough reason for me to do it. It's good enough reason for me to do it that the people on the south side of Chicago feel like they're not invisible and nobody gives a fuck about them. You know, so I don't know about revolution, but it won't be televised.
Hey, Spike, John. Chicagoan, living in Brooklyn now. I had no beef with the title Chiraq at all. But one thing as a Chicagoan, living in Bucktown, living in Bronzeville, and then now here in Brooklyn, I was wondering, how's this New York cat going to tell Chicago's story? What kind of work did you do to try to give Chicago its justice in telling this story?
Very legitimate question. Why don't I ask you a question, though? Did you see my documentary, Four Little Girls? It won
yeah.
It was nominated for an Oscar. I'm not
Yeah.
from Birmingham, Alabama. Did you see my 2 documentaries about Katrina, when the levees broke? If God is willing, I'm not from New Orleans. I'm not from Alabama. But I'm smart enough to know I need to get with the people who are from there. So we started June 1st, filming. But I was in Chicago in January, 6 months before the cameras started to roll. So I got with Father Flager. And Father Flager, in turn, put me with the people how I needed to be. I never come to any situation thinking, I'm motherfucking Spike Lee, I'm from Brooklyn, I know the fuck about everything. I don't roll like that. I don't roll like that.
You've also been coming to Chicago since the Knicks have been losing to the Bulls, right?
Yes.
So I remember I was sitting with him and.
But what
know,
you said is what you're saying.
The old
is
Chicago Stadium, you were always depressed, and I was always happy. So he's been coming to Chicago for a long time.
But what you said is a legitimate concern. But I think that I not follow the motherfucking turnip truck. So go to IMDb, look at my body of work, and I think it speaks for itself. But if you do see the film, I hope you would think that we did your great city justice. No, but that's that's a good question you asked.
Okay, sorry. I hope my question makes sense. But oftentimes, and I know your movies, oftentimes, I just want to understand what you felt like the climate was between Latinos and blacks in the south side of Chicago. Was there solidarity? Are they is that portrayed in the film?
That's not really in this film. I really can't speak about Chicago. I know about L.A. I know that what's happened in the past happened today. Present day between African Americans and Hispanics is not the way it is in New York City. When I grew up, Puerto Ricans, Boricuas, African Americans, Dominicans, it's like the same thing. So we've never had that static that's in L.A. on the West Coast between African Americans and Hispanics. But you should ask John that question about what the climate, what the feel is between African Americans and Hispanics. Oh, yeah, there you go. Give him the mic. That's right. Give him the mic.
So the situation is,
Uh-oh.
right?
The situation is.
So we had Chewy running for mayor, but the problem is since Harold Washington, he was the first person to actually really bring everybody together. So he brought blacks,
Break it down.
Latinos together. But after he died, it just broke apart. People tried
Serious
to
death too, right?
yeah. And so that's kind of what happened. So when we had Chewy running, people were like, oh, I don't know. So it's like plantation politics that goes on in Chicago to a large degree. So unfortunately, the communities are suffering from the same problem, but no one's ever really uniting in that. Puerto Ricans do their thing, even Mexicans do their thing, black folks do their thing, white folks do their thing. And it's, unfortunately, that's kind of what it's like. It's not as fluid as it here in New York. Also, people are more segregated. So communities here, you move one block, it's Pakistani. You move one block, it's Bangladesh. You move one block, it's Orthodox. Same building, there's Haitians. So that doesn't happen in Chicago. That's the first thing I noticed in Chicago and moving to New York. It's definitely much more of a fluid mix.
The other thing that happened, I think, since I was growing up in Chicago, is that usually when you'd hear somebody getting killed, or if there was something having to do a killing around race, there was always either an obvious racial element or there was an economic element, right? It was about money or it was about business. And what's happening in Chicago now is people are killing each other because they get dissed on social media. It's madness. I mean, and so there's all these components to the politics, but I think it has to do with communities that don't have a real economy. It has to do with going from third-rate schools to first-class privatized prisons. I mean, it's no one soundbite. There's a lot of big politics around these issues, but what's different now is that it's just mayhem block to block. Do you think that's fair?
And the reason why that is, back in the day, this stuff is addressed in the film. Jeff Ford, cats like that, they were gangsters, they were killers, but they had a code. They had rules. Children were off limits. Women were off limits. Elders were off limits. If you killed a kid, if you didn't turn yourself, this is in the film. Anthony Bassett says in a very poignant scene, if you killed a kid, if you didn't turn yourself into the cops, you were getting killed. Well, because of the RICO Act, all the OGs got locked up. So when they got locked up, sent away to federal prison, it's mayhem. And so no one's going to step up to be the lead. They didn't even call them gangs now. They call them organizations. So no one's going to step up to be the lead of organization, because you do that, you're going straight to federal pen. So it's mayhem. A lot of young cats, I mean, it's led to a 9-year-old like Tyshawn Lee, who's led into an alleyway, being executed. That never happened back in the day. Children off limits. So
and then
if you kill me, then I'm going to kill your mama, your grandmother. I don't care. I don't give a fuck. I mean, you kill my relative, I'm killing your whole family. That's the.
Or you don't. I mean, Brandon and Kurt were telling me things. That somebody doesn't like what someone says, and they just go to a graduation party and start open fire. So it's
Another thing I didn't understand.
It's gotten even crazier than I've ever seen it.
What John touched upon before, I did not know before I got to Chicago that you could be killed by what you post on social media. If you put something on social media that somebody thinks is out of pocket, it doesn't come correct, Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, you could be killed. That's why at the beginning of the film, we have these tweets and stuff like that.
Hi, I wanted to know if there were any specific events happening either locally in Chicago or nationwide that kind of had you want to stop shooting and figure out a way to incorporate it into the film.
Yeah, we did one of the scenes with about the Confederate shooting with Dylan Roof. Yeah. I came in the next morning and Spike had new pages.
There's a scene in the film that is about Dylan Storm and his active.
Dylan Roof was his name, or I can't remember.
Storm.
The killer for Dylan Storm Roof. Sorry.
Yeah. That when we started the film, that wasn't in the script because it had not happened. But when it happened, and Kevin Wilman and I co-write, we said we got to put this in a movie. So we did that 2 days before we shot.
That morning, the next morning, you'd written it that night.
That's all the time we have. Thank you so much, John Cusack, Spike Lee.
So, yeah, but the name Chiraq was not invented by Spike Lee or Kevin Wilmot.
Yeah, and I mean, you guys shot on the south side of Chicago too, right? You were saying a lot of people came
Yes.
out for open auditions. So what was it like doing a movie like this, a very serious film, on location?
It was fine. We had no problems. You know, people wanted to be there. People were excited. As John mentioned earlier, we had an open call, St. Sabina Church, for extras, background. 5,000 people showed up, and many of the people made it in front of the screen from that audition. So it was a moving experience, but it was a movie. Real life was happening while we were filming. We started June 1st. We finished July 9th. During that time, 331 people got wounded and shot, 65 got murdered, and it escalated. It has escalated since then.
And even one of the things that, I mean, Spike has made a satire, and those often get misunderstood. It's not a comedy, it's not a tragedy, it's a satire. But so it has a lot of wild shifts and swings in tone. But one of the things that I think was so brilliant about the film and the experience was the line between the community and the film was totally porous. So when I was doing my sermon at St. Sabina Church, I'm in St. Sabina Church. Now, they're used to seeing caskets in the front of St. Sabina Church. This is happening every day. So even Father Flager's peacekeepers, Brandon and Kurt, if I don't know if it's okay to say it, but one of them lost a brother right in pre-production.
No,
So-
my first day official pre-production, I attended the funeral. Brandon, who's one of the peacekeepers, he's a former gang members who now work under Father Flager to keep the peace. His brother was shot down. So first day of pre-production, I was attending the funeral.
And then when we're doing scenes with Jennifer Hudson, who had her own tragedy in Chicago, in her family, the people who are seemingly to be extras, they're not extras. Those are the mothers of Purpose Over Pain who have lost their children. And the pictures that they're holding up are their actual children. So it wasn't like we're going on a soundstage and saying, oh, let's see if we can recreate the South Side of Chicago. We were immersed into the neighborhood with the people. So it made it it sobered you up pretty quick. Like if you forgot what you were doing and thought you were making a movie, people around you were saying, no, this is how we live every day. And so we were reminded of that. And when I met Spike the first time, he called me up, which I think I've heard is how he calls up his friends to do a movie. He just calls up and says, Cusack. I said, yep. He goes, it's Spike. I got something for you. Chiraq. And I said, okay. And he said, when can we meet? And I said, I'll meet you anytime, Spike. Right? And then he told me what he was up to. And
like to piggyback what John said, everybody in front of the camera and behind the camera, we told them from the get-go that we want to save lives with this film. So that was the goal. We think we're going to do that. This film comes from a righteous.
So, as you can see, the movie is great, and from the movie, Spike Lee, John Cusack. Please welcome him.
Hello.
hello.
How you doing?
Right. All right, so this movie, you guys filmed it this year, but it's been around, Spike, the script in some form for a long time, right? For 6 years or so. So could you tell us how this movie started, what the genesis of it is?
Well, Kevin Wilmot wrote the original script. It was called, at the time, Got to Give It Up. It was an adaptation of the Aristophanes play Lysistrata, and we were unsuccessful to getting it done. And a year ago, I called him, let's try it again. I said, let's co-write it. Let's move it, let's take place in Chicago, South Side. Let's call it Chiraq. And went to Sundance last January with my agent, Bart Walker, and we had a list of people to pitch it to. And everybody said no, except Amazon. And here we are, film opens Friday.
Yeah, so it's been a pretty quick trip, and the name Chiraq, for a lot of people are just hearing about the movie now and recently. Just give us a little background on that name and why you picked the location.
Well, that was around long.
Place, a spiritual place, and we put value on human lives, and we're also trying to really get to these young brothers who are okay if they die before the year. I mean,
Yeah.
before they're 18 years old.
Yeah, and when as I said, he said, "I'm doing Chiraq." He goes, "Look, nobody's going to get paid. The only reason to do this movie is to save lives." And I don't think that's from a messianic point of view, but if Spike or other artists didn't believe that art had the possibility to actually be a voice for change, then we wouldn't do it all, you know, or maybe we would. We try to get rich doing it, but we also have a part of us that know that, you know, art is supposed to affect change.
Well, and when we spoke a couple days ago, Spike, you mentioned Nick Cannon, who's great in this movie. It's you know, he plays a gang leader and a rapper, and he's phenomenal. And you mentioned that he got some undue criticism for you know, you can talk about it, but you made some real comments about you know, people saying about Nick Cannon and maybe he wasn't from Chicago.
Well, there was some blowback about the casting of Nick Cannon, specifically coming from Chicago, Chicago rappers. The fact that he wasn't from Chicago, he's soft, he hasn't killed nobody, he ain't got bodies on him, he's not in the corner slinging. And this is the thing that really got me. He's not a savage. That's the new term, the new aspirational goal.
Before you made the title of the movie, that was a name that people in the South Side and rappers have been using for a while. And I think there were a bunch of videos and songs, and I think Vice did a series on that from Chicago. So that's been around for a while.
Yeah, and you're a Chicago guy too, John, right?
Yeah, I'd heard the name and the title and seen some of the videos and reports. And everybody, the guy that I play is named Father Corrigan, but it's very loosely based on a man named Father Michael Flager, who runs the parish of St. Sabina Church where we shot, and who was a very close advisor and close friend of Spike's, and became a close friend of mine as well. And you know, he, like many others in churches and synagogues and mosques across the country, are basically doing everything they can to bring some semblance of peace and sanity to these urban centers that have become war zones. So even today, as of this count, I mean, I don't know how many people were killed in San Bernardino. 14 people were killed in San Bernardino today. Then there was the Planned Parenthood shooting just the other day. And then in Chicago, more than 2,300 people have been shot this year. And it's November. So there are people in St. Sabina, Father Flager, and many others all around the country who are basically desperately crying out for attention. And they welcome Spike and his track record and his tradition of making very fearless films. They welcomed him with open arms to tell this story.